Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving deep into a multi-billion-dollar industry that, is really at the center of U.S. immigration policy. This is where big government and big business intersect, and it has huge consequences for a lot of people. So, right after the 2024 election, the Trump administration announced something huge. They called it the largest deportation operation in American history. And look, this wasn't just some minor policy tweak. We're talking about a complete overhaul of immigration enforcement on a scale we've literally never seen. And to make this happen, you need money, a lot of money. Congress passed this massive funding package, which they actually called the One Big Beautiful Bill. It set aside a staggering $170 billion for immigration and border stuff. And a huge piece of that pie was for one thing: detention. All right, so let's get into it. What does this massive operation actually look like on the ground? Let's break down the numbers. Well, the impact has been, wow. It's been fast, and it's been big. In less than a year, we're talking over 400,000 deportations. And to manage all that, you have this huge network of detention centers holding about 60,000 people at any given time. Think about that. Okay, so with tens of thousands of people needing to be housed, it begs a pretty important question, right? Who is actually running these places? And maybe, more to the point, who's making money off of it? You might think the government runs these centers itself, but that's not really the case. For the most part, they contract it out to private companies. This whole system, this public-private partnership, has been the way to go ever since the Department of Homeland Security was created back in 2003. The thinking was, the private sector could do it cheaper and be more flexible. And just look at how dominant this model is. We're talking nearly 90% of all immigration detainees are held in facilities owned or operated by private companies. This isn't some small part of the system. It is the system. So what's the argument for this? Well, you hear from industry leaders like the CEO of Corsific, and the pitch is all about bringing private sector innovation to the problem. They say they can provide high-quality solutions and do it all at a very low cost to government. That's their value proposition. Now, this whole idea isn't new. It actually goes back to the 80s. It got a huge boost when DHS was founded in 2003. But the 2024 election, that was like pouring gasoline on the fire. Investors saw a boom coming, and the stock prices for these companies they shot through the roof. Okay, so we've seen the big picture, the policy, the money. But what does this look like for a single community? Let's zoom in on a small town in Georgia to see how this plays out on the ground. So let's talk about Folkston, Georgia. It's a really small town, less than 5,000 people, and it's home to one of the biggest for-profit detention centers in the country, run by the GEO Group. They're actually expanding it to hold nearly 3,000 detainees. For a town this size, that's everything. It's their economy, but it's also a huge point of conflict. You talk to local officials like the county administrator, Glenn Hull, and he's very blunt about it. He says, without a detention facility, we wouldn't be surviving as a county. For him, it's not just a business, it's an economic lifeline. And you can see why he'd say that when you look at the numbers. The facility brings in over $650,000 a year in tax revenue. That's 12% of the entire county's income. Plus, it's created almost 200 local jobs, which is a huge deal in a place like Folkston. But that's not the whole story, not by a long shot. There are a lot of people in town who see this very differently. You listen to Pastor Antoine Nixon, and his take is just heartbreaking. He says his mindset was, we failed again. He's not proud of it at all. So you have this deep divide right in the heart of the community. On one side, it's an economic lifeline, right? It's creating jobs, it's paying taxes where other industries have just dried up. But on the other, it's seen as a moral burden, an industry that preys on a poor community and doesn't offer a great future for the kids growing up there. And really, what's happening in Folkston is happening all over the country. It's this bigger, fiercer debate about profit, policy, and people. It gets right to the core of whether this whole for-profit system is ethical. Which leads to the million-dollar question, or I guess in this case, the billion-dollar question. With so much money on the line, how do you hold these private companies accountable for how they treat people? Who's making sure they do the right thing? Well, if you ask the companies themselves, they'll tell you there are plenty of checks and balances. They point to two main things. First, they have to meet national standards from groups like the American Correctional Association, and second, they have government monitors on site full-time with, and this is key, unfettered access 24/7. But of course, there is another side to that.
Former DHS officials, like Professor Margot Schlanger, say that in reality, it's not so clear-cut. She says the conditions really vary. Some places are okay, others not so much. And when these facilities get crowded, things can go downhill fast. So when Core Civic gets pushed on this, what do they say? Well, the CEO defends their record pretty strongly. He claims that 99% of the negative stuff you hear is incorrect or false. He does admit, that sometimes individual employees mess up. But he also points to the fact that there are about 1,000 government employees inside their facilities as proof that they have nothing to hide.
And that leaves us with a really tough, fundamental question, something that goes way beyond policy and politics. How can a market put a price on someone's freedom? That's really the heart of the issue, isn't it? It forces us to think about where we draw the line between commerce and, well, human liberty.